Hello everyone and welcome back to another deck guide, this time featuring both of our musically inclined pendulum fairy archetypes, Melodious and the newly supported Solfachords. Honestly, it's mostly a Solfachord deck with a Melodious engine to give us extra starters and eat removal. This deck contains quite possibly the two strongest archetypal spells in the game with Ostinato and the new Solfachord Happiness, so if resolving huge haymakers one after the other sounds fun to you, let's get started. Starting with the Solfachord, since they're the deck with new support, Primoa is one of our new starters. The Solfachords all have protective pendulum effects. They make a good starter pendulum deck because of this. You don't have to worry about any crazy pendulum effects that activate as part of your combo. Primoa lets you bounce a scale to hand after you pendulum summon, which lets you change scales, sure, but it also lets you chain block any effects that triggered from your summoned monsters. Her monster effect then searches any archetypal card to hand, and also if you link summon a Solfachord while she's on board, you can add one from grave back to hand. Importantly, her scale is also just 0, which is the best possible low scale. Cutia is our other level 1. All of the original Solfachords, not the new ones, had a gimmick where their level plus their pendulum scale all equaled 9. That means Cutia used to be our highest scale at 8, and she protects our pen summons from being negated. For monster effects, she gives our Solfas some attack and searches a monster when summoned. Oddly enough, that's not actually a one-card combo, even though it sounds like it should be, but she's still important to play at 1. Solfachia then is our new high scale at 9, and is actually an end board piece, since when she's scaled, if you have an extra deck Solfa on the field, you can destroy her to negate a monster effect. She's also good extension, but better in a pure build, since she special summons from hand if you have no monsters or only Solfachords. Considering pure Solfa has a pretty limited end board and is more of a going second deck honestly, we can't rely on that extension here, but when you do summon her, normally as part of a pendulum summon, you can activate to special from hand or tribute her to special from the extra deck. Dreamia is a scale 7 and also stops pendulum summons from being negated. She can protect a pendulum monster from being destroyed by taking the hit instead, and you can special her from hand if you have a Solfachord scaled. Bracia is a scale 4, and the one in this deck that you never want to scale, because it's just somewhere in the middle, it's a weird scale number. But she stops the opponent from activating effects when you pen summon. More importantly, when summoned, she adds a Solfachord spell or trap, which would make her a starter if not for the fact that she's a level 5. She also stops monster effects during damage step. Again, pure the deck has a lot of weird going second effects which help us out incidentally when we lose the coin toss, but this build does want to go first. Last for the Solfachord monsters, we have Kulia, our level 8, scale 1, which also stops the opponent from responding when you pen summon, but more importantly, she's part of our end board. You can summon her by tributing 2, which you never want to do now that we can pendulum summon her out, but more importantly she can negate 2 as a slow effect, and pop a monster that activates its effect if it has 2700 or less attack, as long as we still have Solfachia scaled. It's conditional, but even if you don't get to use the pop, she's still just a big disruptive body for follow-up that you get for free on your end board. Then for spells, we have the new love of my life Solfachord Happiness. Happiness has 3 effects, and each can be used once per turn. First and most importantly, you can discard a card, search 2 monsters, then special summon from your hand a number of monsters equal to the number of monsters your opponent controls plus 1. Simply put, that's a search 2, summon 1 if you're going first, or just lets you summon out your hand for free if you're going second. This effect is absolutely insane, and we're not even done. Remember how I said you can use each once per turn? The second effect just gives you a second pendulum summon this turn, but only for Solfachord monsters. I probably don't have to explain how crazy that is. Then the last and least used effect, but still very good, is to summon out your pendulum scales, but only if they're Solfachords. That one's better going second for extending through a board and various disruptions. For the older spells, they're all one-ofs. Elegance is awesome, but it's not a starter and it's highly searchable, so we only play 1. I'd play 3 in a going second build. This lets you scale a Solfachord from deck, or put a Solfachord from your hand into your extra deck, then set both scales from deck. Lastly, you can put your scales into the extra deck to draw 2. Sadly, this one is a hard once instead of a once each, so you almost always just use the second effect to set scales, but that's still super good. Symphony is here to search in case we open everything we need. It's a quick play spell with effects based on how many Solfachords with different names are in your extra deck. At 3, everyone gets a nice chunk of attack. At 5, you can destroy a card and draw one. That's the one we're really looking to use. At 7, you can cheat out one of our links. We only play 6 names, so you can't actually use that one in this build, and we don't really want to anyway, since getting our links out is pretty trivial even without it. Piri Rea's map is another copy of Primoa. You can play more if you want more starters, but 14 has been pretty comfortable for me. 1 for 1 is another copy of Primoa that's a special summon instead of a normal summon, and then we're into a fairly small Melodious engine. Refrain is a starter, albeit our worst one that gets much better if we had Electromite like in Master Duel or the OCG. On summon, she searches another Melodious monster, and both of the Melodious scales set themselves from extra deck when you fusion summon. She's got a scale of 1, and when scaled, you can Foolish a Melodious to pump up a Melodious fusion on field. Our other scale is Couplet, who, when searched off of Refrain, lets you reborn another Melodious from grave. Here it's always going to be another copy of Refrain. As a 9 scale, she unfortunately locks you into pen summoning only lights, which kind of sucks since the Solfachords are all different attributes, but her more important effect is that when she's scaled, you can search a Melodious spell, which is our one of Concerto. This is an archetypal poly that lets us fuse with our scales. So if we normal Refrain, add Couplet, reborn if we can, then scale Couplet, search Concerto, and fuse with both, which lets us scale both. Then when this is in grave and your fusion summon goes to grave, you can put it back in deck to draw 1. Last and absolutely not least is Ostinato, which lets you fusion summon a Melodious using materials from deck as long as you control no monsters. So it's just a branded fusion, but you have to do it first, and sometimes it doesn't matter if it gets ashed unlike branded fusion because it's not once per turn. This is 100% our best starter and is pretty much the only way we can end with Étoile as part of our full board. Lastly, for the main, we run 16 non-engine with a mix of hand traps and breakers. Notably, I've been liking Book of Eclipse lately since it can just end yummy, and we end on basically only links, so we're unaffected anyways. The rest is also very scary here, since if we get interrupted, you can thrust for Happiness or Ostinato for another high-quality starter, or if you're going first, hopefully the D-barrier can keep you in the game until your next turn. You can choose to run a bit bigger engine, but I feel like we already have a lot of starters and a pretty solid extension, so I've been enjoying the 16 non-engine. In the extra, we have a few fusions from Melodious. Baka's always the first one we're going into and protects herself from Ash Blossom, which is cool since on summon she specials a Melodious from deck, which is always just one of our refrains. Then, if sent to grave, say as material for another fusion or a link, she can reborn a Melodious, again one of our refrains. Étoile is the big Melodious boss monster and can banish any number of Mellows from the field until end phase to non-targeting bounce that many cards from the opponent's field. She also floats if removed into another Melodious fusion. For the float, I'm playing Schuberto, which is a triple DD Crow, but you could instead play Bloom Diva if you prefer, which is just a Makonko, so you can use that as kind of a circuit breaker in case your board starts to get broken. Then we're on to Link, so we have something to do with our Pendulum Summon materials. Beyond bridges the archetypes by searching a Pendulum monster when summoned, but then you're locked out of monster effects until you conduct your Pendulum Summon. If you summon 2 different levels to her link arrows, you can also pop 2 cards on the field, which can be useful to clear out our scales to set new ones or just to break a board. Musatia lets you swap a pendulum in hand for one from your extra deck, and also lets you search a monster with a level equal to the scale of one you summon. Mostly we want to summon Cutia with her on board, which lets us search Coolia to use as part of our end board. We need a Fiend to make a Baoku, and Cerberus has good arrows and can let us discard to pop a monster. Early can be an end board piece if we have a couple of extra materials and lets us negate and make an opponent's attack 0 when you activate a monster she points to. She also comes back end phase if destroyed. It can be a little awkward to position her on a board, but you get used to it. SP is SP and banishes 2. We also just use her as an end board piece, and interestingly, for a couple of lines, we want to use her first effect to banish our own couplet so we can set a different scale. IP can be an end board piece, or we can just link climb through her to make something indestructible. Tryhard is Baguska at home that can make it annoying to fight through our board. Exceed lets you recover a pen from extra deck to hand, but more importantly lets you summon one monster from hand that's between your currently set scales. That's important for the refrain line and can be useful elsewhere sometimes. Julia is the Solfachord big boss monster and gets bigger for each pendulum in your extra deck. She protects the pen monsters she points to from being negated, and most importantly has a once per turn Omni negate by summoning a scale to a zone she points to. That's how we summon main deck Julia. We scale her at the end of our combo, then when we need our Omni, we summon her, and then the Destroy is online as well. Abawaku is a crazy Link 4 that lets us discard to destroy or to reborn a light or dark. That means we can use SP Little Knight as material, then bring her back at the end of our combo off of a bow. Those are both quick effects, but you only get one or the other each turn. If that wasn't enough, she lets you draw a bunch of cards on your standby, but you do have to put back the same number you drew, so you don't get to actually draw, but more so like filter for the card that you need, which is still very, very good. Access Code clears the board so we can go for the kill, and Goddess gives us an out to unaffected towers and turns IP into an actual disruption. That's it for the deck profile, let's go see it in motion. Okay, so for combos we are starting with the big one, and really the reason that I paired these two archetypes together, the Ostinato Combo. So you're going to need anything to discard for this one, but we're going to start with Ostinato using 2 refrains to summon Baka. That allows us to summon the last refrain from our deck, which allows us to add Couplet, which allows us to summon back one of our refrains from the graveyard. We can scale Couplet to go get our fusion spell, and then immediately use that to get our Étoile. That's going to trigger a whole bunch of stuff. Baka's going to bring back another refrain, and then we're going to have Couplet scale herself, but not refrain. That's because we're going to go into Beyond and grab Primoa, and then use her as our second scale to remember that right here we are locked into just light pen summons. That's why we have to go about it this way, thanks to Couplet. So we're going to scale Primoa, do our light pendulum summon, bring back 2 refrains as bodies, and then Primoa can bounce herself back. We haven't used our normal summon yet, so we can then use her to grab Happiness. Happiness, being the absolutely insane card that it is, allows us to search 2, summon 1, then we can grab Elegance. But wait, how are we supposed to use Elegance? Well, by going into SP and then banishing our own Couplet to make pendulum scale space. Then we can go into Julia, we can go into Musatia, add back our Happiness so that we can get an extra pen summon out a bunch of materials. The Musatia targets Cutia, which allows us to go grab Julia. We can scale Julia as part of our end board. We can use all of our materials to assemble our final end board. So 2 materials go into Cerberus, then Cerberus plus Musatia goes into Abawaku. We banish Abawaku, discarding Dreamia. You could use the Dreamia as extension there instead and discard Primoa if you had an extra body on board. But in this combo you don't have anything extra, so we just discard the Dreamia to Abawaku. Not normally the best play, but if you're doing a full like 1.5 card, that's how it's going to be. And then Abawaku discards that to banish herself until end phase to bring back SP Little Knight as part of our end board. Then she comes back on end phase as well. So this is an Omni negate off of Julia, a pop or recursion off of Abawaku, plus follow-up for next turn, because I believe this is 4 card draws that then, you know, you have to shuffle 4 cards back, but it filters through 4 cards, which is insane. SP is SP, so that's a banish. Étoile is a bounce until end phase that, if removed, allows us to summon whichever of the Melodious fusions you choose. I use Schuberta for the triple DD Crow, but you could also play a Makonko in this spot, which is pretty funny. Julia, when summoned out by our Omni negate, is a destruction, and then Solfachord is a monster negate. So that is a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-ish disruptions plus follow-up, which is really crazy. Okay, second combo, this is going to be our Primoa 1.5 card. You can do the same thing with Piri Res, it's basically just search Primoa, then do this, but we're going to normal summon her, search Happiness, then we can activate Happiness, discarding a card to add Gracia and Cutia. Summon the Gracia, Gracia adds Elegance, we can use Elegance putting Cutia in the extra deck to set scales, then go into Beyond to add Refrain. That's going to be important here in a second, as we pendulum summon out all 3 of our materials, which allows Refrain to add Couplet, Cutia to add Dreamia, and then we can bounce the Primoa back to hand. We can then use 2 materials to go into extra deck Julia, which triggers Primoa to add back Happiness, which we can activate to give us an extra pen summon of specifically Solfachords. That matters because that means we can't summon this couplet from hand, but we have a way around that. We can scale Primoa again, and then go into Musatia. We use Musatia's effect, which doesn't see a whole lot of play, but is actually relevant here. Musatia's first effect to swap a pendulum in our hand for a pendulum in the extra deck. So we put couplet in there, and then we get back any of our Solfachord names. That's all that's relevant because that means we now can pendulum summon 4 bodies instead of just 3. That also triggers the other effect of Musatia, targeting Cutia to add Coolia, which we can scale for an extra disruption. We can use 2 materials to go into SP, 2 materials to go into Cerberus. Cerberus plus Musatia equals an Abawaku. We could, in theory, bring something back off of Abawaku. There just isn't really anything disruptive to bring back right now. But this ends up being our end board. So this is not quite as good as the Ostinato. It requires our normal summon right off the bat, but it is still 5 disruptions. So this is still an Omni Negate, a Destruction, a Banish, another Destruction, or bringing something back, and a Monster Negate, with follow-up, which is pretty tight. Okay, so disclaimer. Combo 3 is going to be Refrain 1.5 card. Only do this if you're desperate and literally have like no other engine in hand. Technically it's combo and it gets you there, but it's a lot of spinning your wheels, a lot of vulnerability, and the end board isn't amazing compared to the other ones. This would be much, much better if we had Electromite back, so once these cards hit Master Duel, it will be much better there. Just, you know, it is something you can do if you only have Refrain. Let's get started. So we're going to normal summon Refrain, obviously, and then that allows us to grab Couplet. We have nothing to summon back, but we can scale the Couplet to get our Fusion online. Then we can go into Baka, which allows us to summon another Refrain from deck, and then we have to set both of our scales here. That's because we need to Pendulum Summon to get around the fact that we're locking ourselves behind beyond the Pendulum. So we can use Baka to bring back another Refrain, and then remember, we are locked into specifically light monsters right now. We go into Exceed, because we don't need its on-summon effect, so we just do it while we're locked by Beyond still. And then we have to conduct our Pendulum Summon of only light monsters, but that unlocks us so that we can use Exceed the Pendulum to summon out the Gracia that we searched earlier, which allows us to grab Happiness, which means we're off to the races. We can then use Exceed and one of our Refrains to go into SP to banish the Couplet to unlock ourselves for our upcoming second Pendulum Summon. So then we can use Happiness to summon out Primoa, which searches us, and we grab both of the Solfagias here for a reason. We're going to scale one and summon the other. We can then go into Extra Deck Coolia, which allows us to get Happiness back, and we can use that to get another Pendulum Summon, go into Nightmare Cerberus, and conduct a Pendulum Summon of sadly only 2 cards here. The only ones we can do are Gracia and the Solfagia that was in hand, but that gives us 2 materials so that we can go into an IP and then into an Abawaku that cannot be destroyed, use Abawaku to bring back SP, and then we've got Abawaku, SP, Coolia, Solfagia as end board pieces. Sadly, without Electromite, there's not a good way to get rid of Refrain to get our Coolia piece as well, but this is still 4 disruptions with some follow-up, which isn't the worst thing I've ever seen. It just is pretty high investment and you end up getting less out of it, but if it's all you've got, if all you have is the one Refrain normal summon, this works. Cool? Cool. And we're back with closing thoughts on our Melodious Solfachord deck. So as far as positives go, the new support for Solfachord is absolutely insane. It gives us a ton of 1-card starters, whereas previously Solfachord didn't really have any. The closest was Cutia, and she doesn't really do it because that just got you Dreamia. Dreamia summoned herself, and then you've got like a Link 2, and where do you go from there? Not much. Which kind of brings us to the problem that I have with this deck, is that if you think about something like Malice, which is a deck that kind of does a similar thing, it just does Link slop, they have a bunch of specific archetypal links to go into that can act as boss monsters. They have traps that act as end board pieces, and they've got a bunch of like generic Cyburst support that they can use. We don't have that. There's not a bunch of fairy links that we can go into, and it's not like we can go into Exes or Synchros. We don't have a tuner, and all of our stuff is different levels, different attributes, so we're kind of stuck with links. And that's a little bit of a problem because wholly generic links are okay at best. We don't have Appaloosa, for example, which would be the best wholly generic link. So we're stuck with something like Early, which is a conditional negate, which is okay, but not amazing in a world of power creep. SP's fine, but we're only using the second effect, which is fine. IP into Underworld Goddess is actually quite strong because Underworld Goddess is a full board negate and then stops graveyard shenanigans. So that's pretty good. Tryhard is Baguska at home. He's kind of almost sort of a tower if you squint, but he doesn't exactly like negate the board like Baguska does. Cooley is an Omni negate, no notes, she's great. A bow is resource intensive to use, requiring us to discard every turn, ours and our opponents, if we actually want to do it. And like the card filtering's great, but discard for a destroy is eh. So like our end board is a little bit weaker than I would like, and that's sad because this is the strongest end board I could come up with as a wholly generic link deck with basically infinite materials. This is like the best I did. I did make one that was just a V-Link, but it wasn't like particularly good. You can use Firewall Dragon, Coolia, and Tryhard as your V-Link spots, but that's all the deck does, and then you just kind of fold to a Raigeki, which is sad. But yeah, no, the weird end board being weaker than it should be for the amount of work we put into making it, that's my biggest complaint. So I don't know, maybe playing just like pure Solfachord going second is better just because that lets you kill people. Like you can use all of your materials to go into Access Code Talker, you can pop a board with Beyond the Pendulum. Maybe that's just the better version of the deck, but I wanted to try and do a going first one where I make a crazy board, and this is the craziest I can make, basically. Anyways, that's going to do it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.